We are live now. We're still new to this whole live stream business. When we did the Global Law and Business podcast during 2021 to 2023, we did 100 episodes, but we had the flexibility of recording ahead of time and then editing afterwards. So new medium, new time constraints, but also it's great to be with you again. I think I mentioned on our chat earlier this week that I miss connecting with you because you and I are in different parts of the country. We're in different practice areas. We sometimes work on the same projects, but a lot of times we're in different circles. And so I'm always happy to check in and get your perspective, hear what you're doing, and get your thoughts on things that I've been thinking about as well. So maybe you can take a second to reintroduce yourself to our audience today.
Sure, absolutely, and I agree. It's great to reconnect and to be doing this once again, although slightly differently and with more maturity and experience behind on our backs. But yeah, so name is Fred Rocafort. I am a colleague of Jonathan's at Harris Sliwoski, officially assigned to our Seattle office, but working from the Sunshine State. And my practice is primarily focused on intellectual property, and within that, particularly trademarks, both domestic and international. But I do get involved in many other matters that are not exclusively IP or don't have an IP connection, especially if there's an international nexus. So helping clients establish corporate entities overseas, helping them negotiate all manner of agreements for their overseas business activities. And also, because I'm here in Florida and I'm a member of the bar here, sometimes I'll get pulled into Florida matters that might not have that international component.
Excellent. So we decided today we would take our next 10 to 12 minutes to talk about AI. It's been on my mind. I mean, you and I read the news a lot. So when ChatGPT was launched it's been over a year now. I think it was about November of 2022. We started to hear about it, read about it. Lawyers aren't really known as early adopters of technology. I think that's probably an overstatement. But I would say at our firm, we do tend to look at technology very early because we believe we're small but mighty. We know we're small, but we believe we're mighty as well in that. And I think technology is something that we like to leverage on our behalf. And so what are your thoughts on that generally, on the quick rollout, and specifically on our topic today? How are lawyers using AI to make a difference in their practices, for better or worse?
Yeah, and I think that's right there. That's a very important distinction to make. I mean, we can talk about AI, as everyone seems to be doing these days, in terms of its potential and all of the things that it can do. And in my own personal life, I've asked ChatGPT or some of the other applications to write Christmas cards for me, things of that sort, and it's great. But there's a bright line between what we do personally and what some people are doing out there, even in the context of business activities. I mean, it might be okay to just turn to AI and let it rip, but for us as lawyers, that's a different story. And just a couple of days ago, I read about what the Florida bar is doing in terms of regulating the use of AI by its members. And just as an aside, the Florida, I still get my Florida publications sent to the office in Seattle, but as it turns out, the previous owner of my house was a Florida bar member, so I just get her publications. It's an arrangement that works fine, but sometimes there's a bit of a lag there. But so this actually happened. It's not a very recent development, although I just looked at it more closely. And that was very interesting. And then I know that you and I had a conversation about this, but it was interesting to look at the scope really of what ethics rules are going to be looking at, or what the ethic rules are going to be looking at in the context of AI. I know that the one topic that we addressed was confidentiality, and that's at the top of the list. Looking at the proposed opinion that the Florida bar is proposing, but it's not the only the only concern. So, what are your own thoughts on this issue of confidentiality? I mean, what are you doing in terms of making sure that you comply with your own obligations as a lawyer when using these applications, assuming you are using them?
I am using them, and probably less than some. I know our partner Dan Harris uses it a lot, and it's very fun because he is an extreme early adopter. So it's been very fun for him to lead, and then the rest of us, him to say, "You need to look at this. You need to look at this. Here are the opportunities to use." I'd say on the marketing side, it's very interesting because I noticed that Dan, I'll write a blog post, for instance, a draft blog post on something I'm interested in or have been researching, and I'm pretty good about getting content in there, but intros and conclusions, not my specialty, I'd say. And so I noticed that for quite a while, Dan would take my blog post, because it's going to be in the public domain in a matter of hours or days anyway. He'll take it to Claude or ChatGPT and say, "What do you think about this?" And then he'll get a response about whether it's and kind of the flavor of the writing. And then he'll say, "All right, now add a conclusion to it." And in a matter of 10 or 15 seconds, it will take my writing, it will write a great conclusion. And then I'll review it later and I'll say, "Dan, this is a great conclusion." And he says, "Well, it was the AI that wrote the conclusion for you." And so it's very interesting dynamics, I think, for me as a writer. A lot of us as lawyers consider ourselves writers, but I think in our firm in particular, our specialty is taking these complex legal themes, breaking them down into digestible pieces for our audience, and that also helps me be a better lawyer as I'm doing that. So that's one way that I've been using it in terms of our outward facing marketing. I'm a member of the Association of Young International Lawyers. There's about 4,000 young lawyers throughout the world, aged 25 to 45, and I'm on one of the governing committees for our upcoming Mexico half-year conference taking place in a couple of months. And the panel that I'm over is looking specifically at AI in M&A transactions. And so trying to be a good moderator and preparing the team. And we're still looking for speakers, actually. So in preparation for all of that, I took a contract, a bulky contract, say a 30, 40-page purchase agreement. And knowing about the terms and conditions of anything you dump into the AI becomes AI property, I went through and anonymized the contract initially, changed all the names, all of the dates, everything that could potentially point to any sensitive information of any parties. And then I told AI to create what I call a closing agenda. And so it goes through, it creates a punch list of things, what has to be done now, what has to be done post closing, who's responsible for it. And I took, I think, 5 iterations of this where I wasn't asking quite the right question. And so I had to keep asking and saying, "Okay, add this to me." And I figured out at the end, I was even asking for it the wrong thing. Something that I call a closing agenda is not exactly what the AI understood I wanted. And so it took a while for me to get to that point. But in the end, I got there, and it still only took about 15 minutes after I had anonymized the document. So maybe altogether, it took a little bit over an hour. That was my first foray into really making the AI be a workhorse for me, the way that I would use an associate or a paralegal to help me to take a really robust transaction document and simmer it down into the data points I needed to continue the transaction.
And that's a good segue into some of the actual obligations that are, not only for Florida lawyers, but some of the regulations, some of the rules that we can expect for other lawyers. You said in the same way that you would work with a paralegal or a summer associate, right? I mean, well, the same sort of oversight that you exercise in those situations, you're going to have to exercise it when using AI. Here's a good line from the proposed opinion that I'll share with you, and I'd like to. Well, I know more or less what your take on it will be, which it will be to say, yeah, sure, but maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. And here's, I'm quoting: "When using a third-party generative AI program, lawyers must sufficiently understand the technology to satisfy their ethical obligations." And let's be honest, I think there are lawyers out there that don't quite understand the technology behind email or cell phones, right? and now we're asking them, to take it up a notch. But helpfully, the advisory opinion continues. This specifically includes knowledge of whether the program is, quote, self-learning, end quote. Use of a self-learning AI raises the possibility that a client's information may be stored within the program and revealed in response to future inquiries by third parties, right? So I like the fact that they're not being cryptic at all. They're laying out the risk and asking lawyers to be mindful of that. But I think that right there is really critical. Get to know the technology. I mean, it's tempting to start. I mean, I know that I use all sorts of technology that is helpful to me without really understanding what goes behind it. But when it comes to legal work, right? I mean, we do need to take a closer look and know what the implications of our use are.
One of the first things I used AI, probably, I don't know, 6, 8 months ago. First thing I did when I got on ChatGPT as the lawyer is make ChatGPT explain to me all of the risks of using ChatGPT. I said, tell me, because I wanted to understand, and I was more concerned about, the I am robot kind of scenario. And so I wanted to see how much ChatGPT would reveal about its own sentience, right? I'm like, because I really didn't understand, the idea of artificial intelligence and all the terms that are analogous to that. I didn't really understand fundamentally how the learning process worked. And so I spent a couple hours one afternoon just asking question after question until I got booted off because I was using the free service, right? They said, all right, you've answered enough questions, you're asking enough questions for today. You got to wait until tomorrow to ask some more questions. I don't think it's because I was getting into the sensitive territory with ChatGPT, but it was really informative to keep asking. And then I confirmed that with some Google searches to understand from data scientists what really happens, how the algorithms are trained. And like you said, is this a learning algorithm where it's open source, basically, where any inputs that get sent to the prompt will be analyzed and will be used in the future? And I think I haven't looked at the terms and conditions for all of the AI bots, but I can't imagine a scenario where they wouldn't do that unless it's a subscription service where part of what you're paying for is you're getting a walled off version of the AI software to use in a confidential way.
Right, which brings us to another point, right? That many of the risks associated with, or some of the risks associated with AI can be mitigated by the use of proprietary models, right? That you develop, that your company develops, or that it acquires. I'm not a big Black Mirror fan, I should say. I mean, I know some people really are. I don't know if you are, but I've watched a few episodes, and there's one episode, and maybe we can share later. I'll track down the specific season and number. But there's one episode I think that is worth watching, and to really get a sense for what we're dealing. I mean, you mentioned that you wanted to get a sense, for how sentient, the model was. And I don't know if you've watched this one episode where this lady basically acquires an AI boyfriend, including a physical manifestation of the boyfriend based on her deceased, real human boyfriend. But it was very interesting because you've got that 90% of the time when it just looks and feels like a real human being. But then there would be those moments when basically, she, at one point, she tells him, like, go away, I don't want to see you again. Wakes up the next morning and he's like outside the house, and it's like, well, I have limitations, I can't, go, more than X amount, jokes aside, right? I think there are some real questions here, and we do have to be careful because at times it does seem like, like you're dealing with this extremely competent source on the other side of the screen, but it does have its limitations.
And maybe if I could bring our conversation to a close now, since we're close to our time, the bar rules are very interesting. Non-lawyers don't understand how important those bar rules are to us, especially the ethical bar rules. I have clients who sometimes will ask me to sign an NDA, and I explain to them that my bar rules are much more stringent than any NDA they could put in front of me.
Right.
And so the idea that the Florida bar, I think, has got to be ahead of the curve in terms of dealing with these issues and helping lawyers to understand what their ethical obligations are. It really matters to us. As soon as they get encoded in rules, even proposed rules, it's time for lawyers to pay attention to how we're using it. We don't want to get stuck with what happened in New York with the AI hallucinating new cases that don't exist and never did, and then the lawyers getting sanctioned for that. It's I think that we all cringed a bit in our seats as we read that. So
it's a good prompt to also look at rules and things like the cloud and so forth.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thanks, Fred. It was great to be with you. Look forward to catching up again next week and the following weeks with you and with other guests that we'll have. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. See you next time.
Take care.